Welcome back to another episode of Just
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
Looking
looking
for a
for
Nut,
a nut,
trying
trying
to
to
get
get
out of
out of
this
this
rut.
rut. Oh my God, we did it!
2 for 2.
Victory! Victory! Now, if there are people that are watching, they probably are observing us and talking about us and saying, well, I'm glad I saw that set of antics with those two people. That was interesting. And then they go back to eating their food and hopefully they continue to listen. I don't know about you. I was thinking a few minutes ago about the very first time I went to Las Vegas. I remember I think I was with my husband. It was when we were together, one of our first trips. And we sat in one of those cheapy buffets, and there was a little window or a little like bar stool table set up where we were able to look out onto the floor of the casino. Oh my God, Oleg, I was so fascinated. I just sat there. I saw some of the tallest beehive hairdos I've ever imagined in my life. I saw people of all shapes and body sizes. I saw cigarettes. I saw cowboy hats and spur boots that were huge. I saw sideburns. It was endlessly fascinating. And I just sat there. And I was so disappointed when someone told me that we needed to go because these people.
Yeah.
Who were they? There are entire internet sites devoted to people watching. There's one, for instance, some stores have entire websites devoted to, and blogs devoted to photos of people that you see just walking around these particular institutions. So that's online virtual people watching. Why do you people watch, or is that just me?
I do sometimes. I don't know if I consciously recognize it when I do, but I have found myself doing it because I think people are fascinating. And everything that you just described, I haven't been to Vegas just yet. I'm actually.
Oleg, how can you even say you're American?
That's true.
Come all the way
Yes.
from Russia and you don't go to Vegas? What next? You're going to avoid Disney World too? Jesus, what's your
Haven't been
problem?
there either.
What? Okay, you just need to go back to your homeland.
No, I think for me, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch other people. It's fascinating to observe their behaviors and how they choose to interpret the world, considering that every single one of us views the world differently. For me, when I people watch, the question that I oftentimes think about is, what is that person thinking about? And the desire and the want to possibly get into their mind and see the world through their lens, and what it is that they choose to find of importance and what it is that they don't choose to find of importance. That to me are the top questions that I oftentimes think about when I get into those situations. I get into situations like that where there are other people who choose to join this show, Kenny being one of them. What exactly goes through Kenny's mind when he chooses to join the particular broadcast and respond in the different ways that he does? For me, it's fascinating. There are more questions than answers that I think I walk away with after I people watch. But at the same time, I think those are the things that keep me going. Those are the things that keep that curiosity and exploration alive.
First of all, Kenny, tell us in the comments, do you people watch? And what sort of things do you look for when you're people watching? And answer Oleg's question too, because we want to know, and that goes as for anyone else who is watching or listening. I want to know, what do you do? Are you aware when people watching you? And I'm not talking in situations like a LinkedIn or Facebook live program where obviously people are. And I just saw Kenny's response, so I had to laugh. That response interrupted me. Kenny, you're too much. I just love you, man.
I think for me, I don't know if I'm ever conscious of it when I am being watched by someone else, but it's got to happen, considering that people watch other people. Other people have got to people watch the different things that I do. one of the things that I find interesting is that I have a friend of mine. One of the things that she does is she is 110% the prime example of someone who people watches.
How do
And
you
I'm talking
know?
about her and I would say, let's say we're sitting at a restaurant having breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or whatever it is. And as soon as there is either a conversation or some individual who happens to be a little bit outside of what the norm of the situation presents. So, for example, someone that walks in with a different color shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you notice individuals like that. Oftentimes you walk into a space and there's kind of a theme almost, right? Like black or white or blue or green or whatever it is. And then someone walks in with a pink shirt and then you're just like, whoa, like where did this person come from? And so I found in those situations where she will actually take the time away from the two of us just to try and understand what is happening at that table. What is the conversation that's being had? What are they discussing? What are they talking about? So for me, those situations are fascinating, slightly annoying because, I'm sitting right across and clearly I'm not given the attention to who I am or the space or anything like that. But it fascinates me. It provokes a lot more questions as far as what is it about those particular individuals or that individual that is so intriguing to her.
Lori Fernandez joined the show. Lori, welcome to the show. It is good to see you and thank you for your comment. It's wonderful in France and amazing everywhere. You can learn so much about human behavior, good and
Mhm.
bad.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Oleg.
I was going to say that's a really good point because if you think about how influence works, it's that I don't know if it's possible to not be influenced by all of the things that are surrounded around us. So all of the people, I used to believe in this phrase that you are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. Obviously, that requires some people watching in order to be able to be influenced by them. What I have realized over time is that, in my opinion, I don't think it's necessarily the average of the 5 people I choose to surround myself with, but I'm the average of all of the behaviors I'm surrounded with. Because in one way or another, I'm paying attention to what individuals are doing, and then how I choose to create my own set of behaviors and habits is probably influenced by someone else's actions. So as Lori had mentioned, the good and the bad and everything in between, I think it always influences us, in my opinion.
Well, but do you people watch in order to get behavioral tips, or do you people watch because it's fascinating? I mean, when I was in Las Vegas, in that example that I mentioned earlier, I wasn't watching because I wanted to get a gigantic cowboy hat and 10-ton spur cowboy boots and walk around with a shirt like John Wayne would wear, although a lot of people look great in that. It just ain't me. And
Mhm.
I certainly wasn't looking to get a big, gigantic beehive hairdo that I remember 23 years later, along with the cat glasses.
Is that a
Right.
John Wayne shirt right now?
No, you know better than that. Kenny says we're both kind of nutty. I think that was a pun on the title of the show, but we can be a little bit nutty too. I think that's fun. Kenny told me to stop laughing. Absolutely not, Kenny. You're gonna have to strong arm me into stopping laughing. I can't stop myself. Jessica Dugas, how are you today? Do you people watch? If so, what is the juiciest people watching thing you've seen? Just another example, sort of going as to behavioral cues versus other potential things that might be justifying or explaining people watching. There is a friend of mine who lives here with me in New York City, and he will often go to Central Park with me and we will sit and people watch. Sometimes we'll animal watch too, because there are animals in Central Park, although they're not the sort that
Yeah.
you really like to see. But in any event, sometimes one thing that this friend of mine I know is fascinated with is bizarre hairdos, particularly with men. Like every now and then you'll see a male I have to admit, I don't usually notice this sort of thing, but my friend does, where he's just like, what is that person doing with their hair? And I look and I'm like, yeah, that is bizarre. And then I find myself fascinated. So maybe I'm looking for style clues or style don'ts.
Yeah.
Behaviors, unless I'm seeing someone who's seems like they're mentally unstable or is suffering some sort of drug induced problem or something like that,
Mhm.
I tend not to pay that much attention, although maybe I am. I don't know what sort of behaviors when you're people watching are you observing or not observing?
Well, I think it probably goes case by case. I'll give you an example. I people watch, and how I used to people watch before today vary depending on the situation. So there are times when I would people watch in order to gain a greater understanding of what acceptance looks like in a particular space. For example, in even understanding what to wear and what's acceptable and what's not. I think for me, much of that was learned from people watching, from
Mm.
observing what other people are wearing and understanding what is acceptable within any given setting, any given culture, because I don't ever remember having a conversation with my parents about this is what you wear to school, this is what you wear to a business meeting, this is what you wear to X, Y, and Z setting. All of those were learned from, I believe, observing other people.
Can you remind our audience members how old you were when you came to the United States from Russia?
12 years old.
Did people dress the same in Russia the way they did in the United States? And the reason why I ask that, and I don't mean generally,
Hmm.
New York City, where I live, first of all, is the fashion capital of the Western Hemisphere. And so you understand living here that people do not dress the same as they do in the rest of the United States. And in fact, I've been in other parts of the country just dressing like I normally do here in New York. And people have come up and said, "You're not from here, are you?" They can immediately tell. But the stereotype of a lot of Eastern Bloc countries is that their sense of style is perpetually stuck in the 1980s and the
Hmm.
1990s, that it's like 15, 20 years behind the US, and that they might wear things that we would never dream of wearing anywhere in the US except maybe as parodies of nostalgic things like TV shows. Was that true, or was it exactly the same? And is that just us being New York or American snobs, which heaven knows we all are capable of? Or at least I'm capable of, and people I know are capable of.
I don't think it was the same. I don't think people wore the same exact things. For example, in the winter, there's this common hat that I think many people wear. It's made out of wool, I believe. And I personally haven't seen that many times here in the States. So I think the clothing, the articles vary depending on the season between the two countries. I know that when I came here, one of the things that I saw as a big difference was there were a lot more bright colors. People wore things of different colors and very bright colors compared to what I was able to see when I lived in Russia. I think in Russia, when I was living there, there was a lot more black and white themes across the board. In schools, you had one particular uniform. Outside of that, people who worked in business oftentimes wore a white shirt with a black suit. I'm sure things like that have varied, especially now. I think other colors have probably become a lot more popular than they used to be. But I do remember coming to the States and just observing how people dress, even in schools.
Mm.
The middle school that I first attended did not have a dress code. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you couldn't show up naked, but you didn't have to wear a suit and a tie. You could wear whatever it is. You could wear pants. Next day you can wear shorts. And both were acceptable. And to me, that was fascinating. The other thing that I found, I think, through my own people watching skills that I've developed over time is something that I mentioned earlier, and that's that form of acceptance. People watching to gain acceptance when it comes to what is acceptable to wear in a specific space. But also, I think what I have spent my time doing, especially when I was younger, is people watching in order to hear some of the conversations that were being had, to possibly either better understand, are the conversations that I'm wanting to have being had by someone else? Therefore, can I develop the courage and a confidence of my own to have a similar conversation with someone else?
Mhm.
So I think there were multiple layers within that I was trying to uncover at the same time. As Jessica had mentioned, fashion and style was one of those, but it was also conversations. What can you and can't you talk about in a particular group setting? And what better way to learn it than to observe what other people are choosing to find acceptable?
I want to hit on fashion for a minute because there's a couple of things in there that you raised that I thought were just interesting observations.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, black suits. In the US, generally, I'm not going to say there are never exceptions, but generally, outside of a few subcultures,
Yeah.
black suits are associated with funerals or with black tie events. It's not something you would wear, or a very specific, like a doorman or something like that. It's something that you would not usually wear as a business matter because it sends certain signals. So it's actually fascinating to me to hear that people were walking around when you were a kid wearing black suits as business outfits. That's unusual. Number one. Number two, I will say about fashion. So when I was in Paris, I remember there was a cafe near where my husband and I were staying on one of the main drags. And there are many more Muslim women in Paris wearing headscarves than there are in the United States, even in New York City. And one of the things, and the women you see in headscarves in the United States tend to be very conservative, just black or maybe gray or a grayish, the color of the curtain behind me, that sort of very plain thing. Some of these women walking around in their heels with these glamour headscarves, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize such a fashion template existed anywhere in the world. And it was jaw dropping. So the fashion was a lens into a whole cultural experience. Then another thing that's interesting, I spent some time in India, which you will be spending some time in as well. And perhaps you'll remember this conversation when you're there. The women in particular, although to some extent the men too, but the women wore these saris that were so bright and the color of the fabric was so rich. And many of these streets, even in major cities of 8-10 million people, were not paved. And they'd be walking around temples without paved grounds or going on motorbikes during the middle of monsoon season with mud roads. And yet these saris, they were never dirty. I can't figure out how that happened. But the richness of the colors, you would go to these temples, there'd be crowds of people and you'd see so many. And then I came back to the United States. And the first thing I noticed, people watching here again, was how drab we all looked, especially the women, which were in basic, you would see a lot of blues and beiges and maybe oranges, but they were muted. It wasn't that same boldness and intense richness. And again, what does that say about the culture? What are the origins of those particular cultural choices versus ours? I think it's just endlessly fascinating. If anyone wants to comment about that, please do. Behaviors, how to act or not.
Do you by any chance know the history behind why our culture, the one in the States as well as so many other countries, chose to accept articles of clothing as the quote unquote not only appropriate but something that you had to have? Because there are places in Africa, for example, that obviously don't require the same. I think it's a lot more in tribes that require the same amount of clothing per individual. And I've always been curious, how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, outside of
Normal people
protective
watching.
covering, I know that some of it is, from what I've read, again, I do not pretend to be an expert on this. Some of it was protective covering from the elements in the north once humans immigrated away. And I also know that a lot of other hominid species that were living in Europe in Ice Age eras,
Mhm.
wore skins to protect themselves from the cold. But also, it's my understanding that some of these clothes were also developed as sun protectors.
Mhm.
And I do suspect that would be an interesting research topic. I may become obsessed with this now. But I sort of
You
wonder
are.
if a lot of the modesty or the sexual things, because a lot of clothing very obviously is designed to control sexual interactions or to make them more difficult or to desexualize environments. And I would be curious to know as to whether a lot of the religious things that have been imposed on that are related to protecting women from sexual advances or
Yeah.
keeping men's under control or just generally regulating human sexuality, which seems to have been a fixation. Kenny says that he wears bright colors. Kenny, I'm actually not surprised to read that.
Mhm.
And saris are gorgeous. Jessica says, yes, they are. One final thing, if I could just throw this in, Oleg. Jessica had a reason for people watching that it never occurred to me, maybe because I'm a monster and Jessica's not, which is people watches to see if she can help people. She's a natural helper. I will say I've never looked at people, just sat there looking at them thinking how I can help them. Although I have thought sometimes you need help to some
Yeah.
of those people. I have to say it's almost never occurred to me that I would help them unless someone who's like fallen on the street and they can't get up. That, of course, I would reach out a hand and help them, or if they needed assistance lifting a package or something.
Yeah. I oftentimes look at situations like that when I know. Well, once again, there are multiple reasons why people watch, but one of the other reasons why I choose to do it is I like to put myself in the other person's shoes or in their situation and approach it through the lens of how would I do X, Y, and Z if I was in this particular situation.
Mm.
So maybe that is in a way tied to some form of helping or whatever it may be, but I think there's something about it, and I guess what I'm trying to get to is at the end of the day, what I choose to believe is that as much as we are different, I believe that we are, I don't know necessarily more similar, but we are definitely similar. And finding those similarities and understanding, well, despite of our differences, where are we similar? Or what are those similarities between the two of us?
Or is it the opposite?
Or is it the
Jessica,
opposite?
right, because Jessica mentions, and I'm going to just bust your beans, Jessica.
Hmm.
Jessica and I had a conversation where she talked about the extreme level of empathy that she has for people. And you've talked to Jessica, I believe. Anyone who knows Jessica knows that Jessica is someone with a truly beautiful spirit.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no other way to describe that. And so that empathy, I suspect, is a lot of why that spirit is experienced by me, at least, as something that's extraordinarily beautiful. And so when Jessica says something like, I want to, I'm a helper, I would want to help people, that relates to what I just heard from you, which is people watching is a way to connect to a community,
Yeah.
whether it's by learning how they behave and behaving similarly, how they dressing similarly, how they interact and interacting similarly. But sometimes I suspect it can also be more pernicious. I'm people watching. There's this site, I find it very troubling, I will
Mm-hmm.
say, called The People of Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
And The People of Walmart is a blog that posts pictures that are usually not very flattering of people that are in Walmart. And it
Mm-hmm.
is a version of people watching. It's a photo, Instagram-ish blogs version of it. And I don't believe that the intent of those bloggers, having looked at it, is to create connection or empathy with the people that are shopping at Walmart. I think it is to people watch with the intent of you, the so-called superior viewer, laughing at them or being horrified or dismayed or thinking I'm better than them. In other words, disconnecting,
Mm-hmm.
severing a relationship between those or that you are watching and the observed.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that that's disturbing to me is I just viscerally am turned off and try and avoid the negativity that comes with watching people to laugh at them. It's just mean spirited, and I feel like that brings me down, and I don't like being laughed at.
Yeah.
But it's still a possibility as to why people might be watching others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something about it. I think there's something about wanting to build that connection and wanting to build that community. And the thing that within that I agree with, and that's what is the fine line between where you choose to people watch to either put others down or to uplift them, to
Mm-hmm.
find those commonalities and say that, or even in situations where I feel like oftentimes, for example, if you know you've been in a particular hardship and you choose to people watch, what is the next action that you choose to do after that particular observation? And how do you choose to respond? Because I know that for me, when I looked at some of the other circumstances within my life, and when I would make judgments on about certain people where I didn't have the awareness that I do today, I found
Mm-hmm.
myself to be in those situations. I would
Mm-hmm.
people watch, I would observe, I would make judgments. And then after a while, what I started to realize is, why am I trying to judge someone else considering that I probably have been in the same exact shoes as them, not only however many years ago, but maybe hours prior to that thing that they were doing?
In my case, I look back on my self humiliation or my self inflicted degradations,
Yeah.
and it's usually worse than the person that I would have laughed at. People joke about how funny someone looks or about how unattractive they are or about their fashion sense. And I think, how many times have I walked around looking like and it's not like I'm Brad Pitt. Who am I
Exactly.
to be talking about anyone else's looks ever? I
Yeah.
don't think I'm ugly, but to someone out there, I assume I'm quite ugly, just as to someone, hopefully that one person is my husband, I'm not ugly at all. But these things are so subjective, and part of being human is that we make fools of ourselves. We do things that are ridiculous or
Yep.
embarrassing and or outside of social norms and generate discussion about us, or else we
Yeah.
just melt into the background to such an extent. If you were in a crowd, would you rather be the person that people watching to look at, or would you rather be the crowd that they are ignoring because they're paying attention to all the other people that are like Kenny, wearing bright colors or other interesting, exciting things that distract the eye?
I think it depends on the level of one's self-confidence and self-image. So if I felt perfectly comfortable within myself and had a good understanding of who I am, then I don't think I would mind being the one to that is looked at. Now, if I struggled with those things, if I struggled with attention, or if I didn't have the confidence to be able to be observed by others and not necessarily not care what others think, but process it in a different way, then I think I would find it challenging. I think I would find it challenging. It's the same exact reason. Think about this. I don't know if this ever happened to you or um, happened to anyone that's listening, Kenny, Jessica, Lori. When I was in school, it started in middle school, I believe. Every single time I was asked to read out loud, that was the one activity I simply did not want to do. In fact, there
Why?
I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel confident in my language ability. I didn't feel confident in my body language or any of these other things. I felt afraid of being able to mispronounce certain words, especially words that I haven't encountered before. And outside of that, it was as if a spotlight was put on you. You were oftentimes told to stand in the middle of class and read one to two or multiple passages from a book, which sometimes I didn't read beforehand. So, talk about new encounters that I had to do during those days. But it brought those situations outside of what the activity really was. It wasn't solely about reading out loud, but there were all these other things that were working simultaneously that I had to develop. The confidence, the courage, the limiting beliefs. I mean, I remember sometimes when I would get up in the middle of class and internally my dialogue would be just literally, don't mess up, don't mess up, pronounce every word correctly. Those thoughts alone oftentimes trip me up 99% of the time.
Wow.
So I think there's something about people watching in those situations. I remember when I was younger and choosing to put myself in their shoes. So when someone messed up pronouncing a word, or there was a spelling bee that we had to do for that class and they messed up the spelling, instead of choosing to laugh, Jessica actually brought up a really good point. And it's the same exact example of seeing a person walking down the street and slipping on a patch of ice. What do you choose to do? Do you choose to put yourself in that same exact situation? Do you laugh at them? Do you judge them? Do you say everything else that in the book, I can't believe this person did that, when the reality of the matter is 24 hours earlier, you did the same exact thing. In fact, here's what I've also learned about it. And this might be a slightly unrelated topic, but this is where I think karma plays a role. You know, oftentimes when people watch, especially someone like that, an individual who slips on a piece of ice, and let's say in the situation, in that particular case, you laugh. Isn't it funny or interesting how literally a minute or 2 or 3 minutes later, it happens to you in the same exact way?
Or worse.
Or worse. So it makes me really question as far as what role does judgment really serve in observing other people, and could your circumstances be different if you were to approach your people watching through a different lens and show empathy and compassion and all these other things instead?
I want to, though, what Jessica, that's some great stuff, Oleg. Thank you for saying that. Really thought-provoking. Jessica's remark that you just flashed on the screen raises a number of issues. Jessica, thank you for such substantive and thoughtful input here. Because embedded in this, and Jessica, I'm going to make some assumptions here. I know that they're assumptions, and you can and you should disagree with me if you think I'm being unreasonable, and I could be totally off base here. I acknowledge it up front. Embedded in this is the statement is I'm seeing it as, well, the right choice or the ethical choice or the empathetic choice would be to reach out and help them. And it's an issue that I feel extreme ambivalence about. This is being a New Yorker here. Because when I first came here to New York, and this happens to a lot of people that just come here, and I hear tourists talking about this when we dare to walk down into the subway and ride it, which has not been for a year and a half. They're shocked by the harshness of the people here, or perceived harshness. You will have people that give little cards that say, I'm blind and deaf. Will you give me money? Or you'll see people who have had grotesque, tragic amputations or extreme burns on their face, walking around begging for money, or people saying, I cannot feed my child tonight. Will you give me a sandwich? All that sort of stuff regularly goes on the streets. And this is the first, I would be the first to say this has happened to me. You will see people begging for help. They might have slipped on ice, or you might see them about to slip on ice, and you very self-consciously do nothing. Or you may be in situations where there's fights about to erupt on the subway.
I'm going to open my door real quick. Keep going.
Absolutely.
I'm listening to it.
Thank you. And the reason why I'm raising this is I wonder to the extent to which in those situations, people watching with a sense of empathy is actually a dangerous thing. At least in a culture like New York City's, you generally don't respond or you ignore to that catastrophe about to happen, not because you're not empathetic, but because it could be a scam. Or it could be something that happens where people set up a apparent accident or a situation where they need help in order to rob you. And so there's a defensive nature to people watching too. I find that a lot of being successful as a New Yorker living in the city itself is constantly people scanning wherever I go, not to check for fashion, not to check for behavioral cues, but to see whether something weird is going on. And there can be a lot of weirdness going on. Jessica, you say the right choice for me would be to reach out and help when I am able to, and you capitalize able. I don't necessarily believe that that's everyone's role, and believe that you should use discretion, which are whole other conversations. And Kenny says, so impeccably dressed too. Kenny, thank you. I try to look somewhat stylish. At least I try and not be the person that's wearing something from 2 decades ago. I would love to hear from Kenny, Jessica, or anyone else whether you have ever been in situations where you've shown empathy to someone that you're people watching, and whether it's bitten you in the rear end. In the meantime, Oleg, what are your thoughts about the dangers of empathy depending on the cultural milieu that you're in?
That's a good question. So I think for me, what I have found sometimes is, depending on the situation and what it is that's happening. So empathy and judgment, I think, are two interesting subjects that I choose to explore, and here's why. As I mentioned to you earlier, in some of the situations where I chose to judge instead of showing empathy to the individual for the things that he or she might have done, considering that I probably have done the same exact things at some point in my life or another. What I find interesting is that I think there is probably a fine line between, in learning from that particular judgment and trying to understand that, okay, here's an individual who made a particular choice, or even myself. And even though I can show empathy and compassion for the different things that they've done, I also have to be able to, I think, exercise some of the healthier components of judgment in order to possibly not repeat the same exact things moving forward. So, for example, if you were to do something such as, let's say you're going to do X, Y, and Z and you don't follow through on that particular thing, but I'm someone who values the follow through process. So if I tell you that I'm going to make an introduction, I will try my best to follow through on that by a particular date, right? So if you don't end up doing that, I can show empathy for you for whatever X, Y, and Z reasons for why you couldn't do the particular thing. But at the same time, where do I draw the line for myself in understanding that just because someone else chose to do just because someone else had X, Y, and Z circumstances in their lives that prevented them from doing certain thing in their life, does that become an acceptable behavior for me? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like
I'm
where
thinking,
where do I draw that line between still showing empathy to you that yes, life happened, X, Y, and Z circumstances took place, but at the same time, how do I use your experience as an experience that I can learn from and continue to maintain the discipline and whatever else that I choose to value in my life going into other events or other circumstances within my journey?
one place I love to people watch, particularly if I've had to get up very, very early that morning and I'm running on fumes, so I can't read, which is normally what I like to do in this location, is in an airport. And one time I was sitting there with my husband, people watching. Near the line that went into, so there was a general seating area, then there was a line where there was a security check. You showed your passport, your ID, and your boarding pass, and then you went into an interior gated waiting area as people literally went on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because at this particular airport, you didn't have to go through security the minute you walked in. They had the security all done right at the boarding gate for the particular airplane flight that you're getting on. And as I was sitting there, people watching outside of that boarding gate and just looking at people showing their passports and taking their luggage through the check to wait for the plane to call them in or the flight attendant to move them on. I saw someone, and the line was long. I saw someone decide to skip the line and lift up one of the little gate things and just walk through and sit inside the security zone and wait for the plane.
I've seen.
What would you have done?
I've seen things like that before. To me, I find them interesting because here is what is perceived to be the behavior that one needs to follow in order to get onto the plane. And then there's someone else who chooses to do something different. Mm-hmm. Now, this happens, I think, in addition to the situation that you described at airports, that also happens with baggage. Think about it this way. Every airline requires you to have a specific size bag, depending on the airline you fly with. For example, when I used to fly with Spirit and Frontier Airlines, man, that was literally at the top of the conversation. What size bags, what size carry-on, and then everything else was external, the seating and where you can put those bags. So what I found myself in doing, because I've also been on the other side of that, I've been the person who had carried a bag that was clearly two sizes over. And yet I would try and find some way to get that bag onto the plane. I tried every single technique, and I hope that those that are listening right now are not the people that are working at those gates, because I will be revealing all of my secrets here. And how I learned them was from watching other people. So what I oftentimes do is, depending on the flight or depending on the situation, before I get onto the plane, one of the very first things that I've trained myself to do is to strike a conversation. Once you strike a conversation, what I've observed based on other people doing it is that you actually divert the individual's attention from having to focus solely on the bag to having to focus solely on you and what's being said.
You little street urchin, you.
And if you ask a different question than the question that was asked previously by the person boarding in front of you, you are more likely to catch them off guard and literally shift their attention. So if you ask the question of how are you, how was your day, that's probably a question that's going to be repeated 50 to 100 to a couple hundred times. But if you ask them something completely unrelated, I found that the attention shifts so much that it truly becomes about the question and about the about the conversation rather than the bag itself. In observing that, what I've realized is, as you were mentioning, it's different, but at the same time, it's fascinating in seeing that, because I think what it proves at the end of the day is that if you truly set your mind to it, you can achieve whatever it is that you envision, such as getting onto the airplane where the bag size was supposed to be this much, and then your bag happens to be 3 or 4 times bigger than that. So how would I respond to that if I was an observer, depending on who I am and what type of day I'm having? What if I was the individual that got busted for having a bag that was twice the size and had to pay the $70 fee at the gate? I probably would not look favorably, and someone like myself who got onto the plane through whatever tactics that one had to use. But if I was someone else, let's say if I'm someone else that enjoys the challenge, I suppose, of anything, or genuinely interested in what can you really achieve once you set your mind to it, I might appreciate a behavior like that and having the opportunity to see it. And I think the other thing that also fascinates me about this is there's something about, and I believe this goes directly to people watching, there's something about wanting to know whether or not the other individual or the other group have or know that they truly can do something. For example, if you were to share with me a goal, or if Jessica were to share with me a goal of hers in the next week, months, whatever, one of my very first things that I would try and concentrate on is, can she really do it? Or can you really do it? And then watching people's actions and behaviors just to observe, not necessarily to doubt you however many days or weeks down the road, but more so just to observe and see how fascinating the process really is.
Are you making pointed remarks about me, Oleg?
No, no, I just find it fascinating to observe other people and observe how they're able to achieve different things in life, especially the things that they themselves believed were impossible once upon a time, and yet they still find a way to do it. Like that, to me, there's just something fascinating. That's the best thing I can put it about that. Something that is so intriguing that once once once
Jessica busted you.
once the person is able to achieve a thing that they believe to be impossible, there's, I don't know even know if I can put it into words. There's something extremely interesting.
Do you think it's possible to not people watch?
That's a good question. For me, I would say probably not, because I don't think I've ever done that. I think I'm always people watching. I think the duration for how long I people watch, what I people watch for, varies from one situation to another, but I believe I'm always watching. I'm always observing. Every single time I go outside and I see the person walking on the other side of the street, my attention always goes to that situation and tries to understand, what are they thinking about? How are they teaching their dog what I'm trying to teach Caleb? So I think, I don't know, there's something about this space that I'm in right now, and I know that you share a similar space. I know that Jessica is in a similar space. When I became a lot more grateful for solely the ability to be alive, I've become a lot more appreciative of all the different events and all the different people that surround me, because I believe everything and everyone has a purpose. Therefore, everything and everyone can teach you something that you haven't known before. So people watching, in a way, almost becomes a necessary skill, I think, in order to be able to really understand that lesson that's being taught to you.
Lori, Kenny, Jessica, if we were in the middle of a crowd, and Oleg, I ask you this too. If I was just sitting in the mall somewhere watching people, would I notice you? And if I would or wouldn't, would that make you happy or sad?
Hmm. Well, I would answer it question with a question. Is it a desire for you to be noticed? Do you wish to be noticed? That's actually a good question.
Yeah, I do. Hell yeah. You think I'd walk around with a loud voice, acting out like I didn't want to be noticed? And I offer no apologies for that. I think it's fun. My husband laughs and jokes at me and says, Scott, you've got a big personality. Yes. I'm not melting in the background. I did that for many years when I was young, and I realized that's just not the right place for me.
I find myself to be in both situations. I think there are times where I don't wish to be noticed. There are times where I do want to. I don't think it's necessarily to blend in with the crowd or whatever it is, but there's just, I don't wish to attract additional attention to myself. But there are other times where I'm sure that changes. I'm sure that there are other times where that form of attention probably brings additional sense of being valued, being seen, being heard, being appreciated. So depending on the circumstance, I think for me it varies. but I
If
also don't think that there is necessarily one way of doing that.
Jessica says she'd buy me coffee, I'm sure she'd buy you coffee too. And Jessica, I'd buy you coffee absolutely right back. Oh, like if I got you a big, gigantic purple cape
Yeah,
with like some sort of fur thing and a crown of gold and a
yeah.
gold scepter and some massive like boots and said, okay, walk through the mall and see if people notice, would you do it?
No.
But what if you wanted to
I
be
guess
noticed?
so. I think there are other ways to do that rather than to dress up like that. I think it would depend. I think it would depend. I think it would depend on whether or not I felt challenged enough and whether or not the reward for doing something like that was big enough. So I would give it a shot. I would give it a shot if there was, I don't know,
50
uh,
bucks?
yeah, 100.
What if someone said no one will ever notice you again?
That would be sad. That would be, it would be sad because I think getting noticed, I don't think it solely is about what you just described in wearing a cape and a crown and golden gloves through whatever the nearest mall might be near you. But I think getting noticed, it happens in conversations. Right now, we choose to notice each other's presence. We choose to notice those that choose to join these conversations, Jessica, Kenny, Lori, and everyone else. So I think in a way it would be harder for me to find meaning and purpose. I think being noticed, being heard, being seen, being appreciated, all of those somehow play a role in that larger meaning and purpose of who you are as an individual. That's at least my opinion of it. That's what I believe in. So if those things weren't present, and I know that there's a lot of conversation that takes place outside of this where um, if you choose to do the work, then your work will somehow be noticed, and those that are attracted to the different things that you're doing will find you in some shape or form. And I believe it's true. I believe to a degree there is truth in that statement. But at the same time, I also believe there's a lot of truth in recognizing someone else's work or recognizing someone else's efforts,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily to validate what they're doing is right, but more so just throw an additional layer of inspiration or empowerment. Because as much as I want to make myself believe that every single day I'm upbeat and it's the best day I've ever had, that's just not the reality of the matter. There are days where I wake up and I don't want to do the different things that I do. There are days when I wake up and the very first thought that I experience is self-doubt. So in those situations, having other people reach out to you and notice you as an individual, notice the contributions you make in this world, I think those are all valuable and necessary things to have, in my opinion. Like, do you feel the same exact way?
Yeah, I really do. Invisibility. Sometimes I think it's reasonable to want to be invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like let's say you committed a crime,
Yeah.
and one of the best ways to escape the situation is to sort of blend in with a crowd, be invisible. Or if you just don't want to get caught, they always say you can hide in a crowd if you utterly and completely blend in.
Yeah.
And that is even if the underlying crime or the underlying reason that you have for wanting to be invisible is itself not legitimate, the desire to escape the consequences of it by blending in is totally legitimate and not crazy at all.
Yeah.
I oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I would share a quick story in regard to what you just mentioned, and that's wanting to feel invisible in some situations. I recently shared this story that I had when I was in college, and I believe I was either about to graduate or it might have been my junior year. And my friend and I, her and I, thought it would be a great idea to start a business instead of going out there and finding a job, or we thought it would be easier to start a business than trying to go find a job. I don't believe we were correct in that particular situation, but we chose to do it anyway. And so one of the needs that we noticed on our campus was that many of the students, especially when they approached junior and senior year and about to graduate, one of the biggest things that they were in need of was some sort of guidance or help when it comes to developing a professional presence online. So whether that meant a LinkedIn page, resume building, job interview skills. So her and I, what we decided to do is we decided to create this one-page flyer where we would list the different services, and then within the hours of creating it, we went on to the college campus and distributed that amongst the department buildings, mailboxes, and everywhere. Well, here's the funny thing about the whole thing. We were offering a professional service, and on the flyer, we spelled the word professional wrong.
So did people see you?
The people saw us, and we distributed the flyer, I believe, closer to 2,000 or 3,000 times.
Wow.
So think about that. And then I remember this moment where her and I were sitting in my room waiting for the phone to ring. I believe that's probably true of every entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
When you put your vision out there, there's just this like thing that somehow the phone is going to start ringing off the hook. You're going to have to get assistance off the bat.
The reality, you think about Jeff Bezos, right, with the little bell that they had during the very early days of Amazon in the garage.
Yeah, so situations like that, and her and I were sitting in the room and we were waiting for our business to pick up. And we received this email from one of the faculty on campus, and the subject line was regarding your flyer. We open it up, and she points out the error. She said something along the lines of, although I admire your determination to be able to start this particular venture and to help fellow students, I believe that there is an error that you would want to fix moving forward.
It's a really nice person, actually.
Truly. And she took a picture of it, and she even circled it to show us. In seeing that, my first reaction was, I laughed about the mistake. I thought it was actually really funny that we were offering a professional service and we spelled the word professional wrong. But the second reaction that I had is I literally, as you described, I wanted to become invisible. I wanted to go hide under the blanket for however long because I didn't know who saw the flyer and I didn't know what they would think of me after seeing that and after seeing that mistake, and whether or not that was going to change any of the connections or relationships that I had.
So would you disagree then with the saying bad publicity is still better than no publicity?
I think from lived experience, my form of bad publicity has been a form of good publicity. I don't know if that is true in all situations. For example, if I were to murder someone, obviously I don't think that's a form of good publicity. So those situations I don't think would be as beneficial. So I think it really depends on the situation and the set of circumstances. But in my case, I think it was a great form of publicity because it put us on the map. And if I remember correctly, there were actually a couple people that ended up reaching out to us that we ended up helping with. But it really varies. It really varies on the set of circumstances.
Jessica says bad publicity is so hard to deal with, even if it helps. That's candid. It reminds me of one of the weirdest things I've ever read in my life. There was a man who was convicted of murdering his wife. His name was Scott Peterson. Really, really a physically attractive man, and he killed this beautiful woman that he was married with. And when he was, and I think that the fact they were so good looking and that this idyllic marriage just ended in such a gruesome, horrible manner. He basically was interviewed after he was convicted, and he was put in a car in his handcuffs and then driven to be permanently incarcerated. And he was quoted as saying, when I was getting in the car, as they were walking me to the car, and I might not get this exactly right, but this is more or less the thrust of it. And as he was driving away, the car was surrounded by people like snapping their cameras and taking pictures and gawking and all this sort of stuff. And the word he used was, I was really jazzed by that. And I thought, that's fascinating. That's the ultimate in bad publicity, you being carted away to a penitentiary for life.
Yeah.
And to be excited or think that that's something wonderful or that gives you a thrill, to me was so alien to how I would conceive of it. I tend to empathize with Jessica. To me, bad publicity might help me, but it's challenging. There are times, though, when I've heard that people were saying bad things about me, and I've kind of laughed about it, or I've kind of enjoyed it because I've been like, good, they're talking about me. But that's usually when I deliberately have done something divisive, knowing that it would get attention and understanding full well that there would be a certain segment of people that would be trash talking me because of it. That's cool. Have you ever done anything like that?
Well, the thing that it made me think of as you were sharing that is, I believe people watching in that particular situation, at least for me, is an important or rather critical skill to have, because there was a situation, as you just described, and the person was asked of their opinion of what happened or what did they think of it, and they said X, Y, and Z. So that for me would be a learning opportunity, because not necessarily what I would say after murdering someone, but more so what I would say in any given situation when asked a question, especially when asked a question that has the possibility of that answer being shared across multiple platforms, thousands, if millions of people. So if anything, what I've learned over time is that from watching other people, I've been able to better understand what does it actually mean to maintain an image. And how do you control your image in certain situations? And what do you choose to share and what do you choose not to share? What is considered oversharing and what is considered getting straight to the point, still meeting their objective as far as the question that they asked, and not getting yourself into a situation where you might feel uncomfortable or there's a subject that you don't feel comfortable talking about. So what I'm learning and what I think I've learned from this particular story that you just shared as a reminder is be careful about what I share, because you just never know how it's going to be shared, whether it's going to be shared in context or out of context.
Jessica has a great anecdote that she just put in the comments that is very similar to this. And it reminds me of a personal anecdote of my own. Now, I have not had anything go viral yet. Jessica, I'll reach out to you if that ever happens. But one thing that I find is fascinating is that you put something up on social media and there can be a certain degree of ownership that people feel they have over you because of that connection that they feel. And I'll never forget this. I think I've spoken to you about it before, Oleg. There was a photo of myself that I put up on Instagram, and it was on Facebook too. At that point, I wasn't on LinkedIn yet, or at least if I was, it was very nominal. But on both Facebook and Instagram, people private messaged me and were like, take that down. You don't look good. That's not, basically it was a picture of me with my eyes closed.
Yeah.
You look like you're dead. You look like a corpse. That's not the Scott Mason that I like.
Yeah.
We expect a different Scott Mason here. And I was fascinated by that. It was not probably as hurtful as what Jessica is describing in her TikTok example, but it's still, part of me was like, oh, good, this one got him talking. But on the other hand, it was sort of
feels
unsettling.
Like an attack.
Yeah. And it was personal, and it was about, no one likes to be that you look like a corpse.
Yeah.
Or be able to take that down.
I've had situations like that. I've had many situations like that where people would disagree with certain things, not necessarily photos, but just some of the written content. And I think there is a interesting, at least for me, there's an interesting thing that I choose to do. I can either listen to what the person's saying and then choose to take that course of action, or I can look at it through a completely different lens and ask myself, what am I here to learn?
Yeah.
What can this person help me see? Or even ask them questions. Why did you choose to say that? What made you say it? Why do you feel that strongly about a particular thing? So I don't know. I think people have their own reasons, people have their own ways, and oftentimes I'm not even sure that people, including myself, are always aware of my own things or my own ways. There's just certain things I think I've accepted for however many years that I don't really question. Like, why do I do some of the things that I do?
It makes me think of when I was younger around celebrities, and I've gotten a lot more sensitive to this, although obviously I'm not a celebrity. When I would go on
You are
entertainment,
just a squirrel looking for a nut show.
I am, well, thank you. Um,
Except the
back to the
fang
subject.
as it
So,
is.
yeah, I would be on fan blogs of musicians that I liked, or actors, or comedians, or whatever, and there might be a photo shoot that they had, or there might be a promo cover of something that they had recently released, or whatever, and I would be just as guilty as anyone else. Oh, they look like garbage. Now, oh, what were they thinking with that hair? Oh my God, what a hideous that coat makes them look like they're like the Blob come into light or something. All sorts of insensitive, ridiculous, childish remarks, and I would just say it off the cuff because to me, those people, they weren't really people. Now, there is a question, why did I care enough to comment? Probably because I needed more mental stimulation, or I needed to focus my energy somewhere else, which is what I've chosen to do. The fact is that I would be wasting time on an entertainment, that I would be spending my time on an entertainment blog talking about someone's choice of boots. This shows I needed something better, at least to me, that I needed to do something better with myself. But also did dehumanize or objectify the person that I viewed them as, to such an extent that I viewed them as a commodity. And that is, it's interesting because celebrities make money. A lot of it, usually, they deliberately put themselves out for the world to see. They have success. They live in glamorous houses and drive big cars and have people worshiping them and have good dietitians and trainers and things like that. So it can be easy for people like me that are a little bit more mundane to say, oh, they have it all. They can withstand. They're not real like me. And forget that words that even a regular person who might think I'm nobody to them, that could lacerate another human being's spirit if they see it.
Yeah. I used to feel the same exact way about celebrities, and I used to question what it is that they choose to wear or how it is that they choose to speak in public. There's one particular figure that I remember I used to look at differently compared to the way that I look at him now. He is a basketball player. He used to play for the Thunder. His name is Russell Westbrook, and he has been known, along with a couple other people by now, to wear things that are completely different from what anyone else is wearing. Not necessarily good or bad, it's just drastically different from the styles that were wore in the NBA and still is. And I remember when I first noticed those things, I would judge. I would do exactly as you described. And then after a while, I started to realize that who am I to judge? What if there's actually a huge lesson that I can learn from his choice of clothing? And that is, what if to him that is what it means to be bold, courageous, confident, and all these other things? And what if I am the one that can look at that and actually step into my own sense of style and identity when it comes to being able to wear X, Y, and Z? Because here's the thing, I don't know if you experienced this, Scott or Jessica or anyone else, but there are situations in life where you want to wear a certain thing, but you don't choose to wear it because X, Y, and Z reasons or whatever. But oftentimes it's okay. I don't want to be, as we were talking about earlier, I don't want to be the one in the room that everyone looks at. I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't want to be X, Y, and Z. What I realized over time is that why limit myself to those thoughts? Why am I choosing to believe those as a form of reality when maybe people like Russell Westbrook and all these other people, maybe that's the intention. Maybe they're not trying to be just different out of the whole pack, but more so maybe they're trying to inspire other people to step into
Mm.
their own sense of courage and
Mhm.
confidence when it
Mhm.
comes to
Mhm.
clothing and identity and ultimately self-expression.
Mhm. I never thought about it that way. That's really, again, it shows, at least in my case, the limitations as to the potential motivations people might have for actions that I can't see because of my own blinders.
Yeah.
Jessica, by the way, has promised that when we're celebrities, she'll roll out the red carpet and she will never judge our clothes. Good, Jessica, because I plan on wearing some clothes that will really test your resolve there. I'm holding you to this. Have you ever been in a situation, or maybe this, I'll ask this a different way.
Yeah.
A friend of mine spent a day with Michael Jackson. And this was Michael Jackson after he'd had a number of different physical transformations, most of which he denied ever occurred.
Yeah.
But anyone looking at them might come to a different conclusion. And one of the things he said was that people would be in this place that he was with Michael Jackson. It was a public place. They would be milling about, people watching or doing whatever they were doing. And then they would see Michael Jackson and then recognize that it was him. It took a moment, but then they would snap out of people watching mode and then engage in some very extreme, intense crowd behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been in a situation where you have seen a celebrity in the middle of just a crowd walking around? How have you behaved? What if you had been in a crowd at the mall, just people watching one day, and Michael Jackson had walked by?
That's a good question. I don't know what I would do as far as what my actions would be. I don't know if I would be starstruck or whatever it is that would come to my mind. I think what I have learned about not necessarily Michael Jackson, but maybe other celebrities that I have had some time to observe and to better understand why they do certain things that the way that they do is, I remember when I was younger in thinking about that same exact question. What would I do if I were to meet Michael Jordan? Or what would I do if I were to meet some of the actors that I respect? Matt Damon, for example, a lot of the films that he's in. And so when I was younger, the response would be A, I would be starstruck, and B, I would have no idea what to say. It's as if I was just born, and had no ability to speak the language. So those are two things that would happen. I think now, having had some appreciation for them as people and not necessarily as celebrities, and also having met some people who are considered to be celebrities in different industries, I've learned that at the end of the day, they are still people. Yes, they're different compared to some of the different things that they're doing or choosing to do, but it doesn't make them any more or any less human than we are. They're just doing different things. They have different goals. They have different aspirations
When
than we
you're a
do.
celebrity, are you going to wear outrageous clothes and get outrageous hairdos?
I think I'm going to have to inspire some courage and confidence in other people's identities and self-expression. No, I don't know. I think fashion is something that has been on the back of my mind in wanting to understand, and something that I genuinely have an interest in. Personally, I think it took me quite some time to understand the different colors that I like rather than other people like on me, because there's a big difference. I remember when I was younger and trying to understand why is it that I like green or blue or some of these other things, and other people would suggest other colors, orange, red, whatever it is, and I never fully understood that because I didn't have the same exact connection to
Mm-hmm.
those colors.
Mm-hmm.
So when the person would say, "Oh, you would look good at this in this," I didn't think to ask them the question of why do you think that?
Mm-hmm.
Except I just accepted that as their own thing. So I think moving forward, especially as I go on the travel, finding a sense of style and fashion is probably not at the top of my list, but it's definitely top 5, top 10 that I would want to better understand.
Jessica says she's going to send us a picture. I can't wait to see it, Jessica. I won't giggle. I think you'll probably look foxy as heck in that, whatever that was. Well, it depends on how little you were. But I was, it's interesting. When I was younger, I had at one point a mohawk and 6 earrings. And
Really?
I put on my motorcycle jacket and my boots and my black pants and go out to the club. And
That is a picture we've got to see.
I don't know that there are any. I was really skinny too. And I got attention. I don't know if I did. I definitely wouldn't have minded the attention. It was daring.
We've got to see that one, Scott. You've got to find a way to dig that out of whatever box it might be in.
I'm sure someone has a picture somewhere, and I'll murder them first.
But it's funny that you mentioned that because it takes me back to, let's say, even the days when I was in high school. The things that I used to wear back then. I think starting high school, 9th grade for sure, I don't think I had a sense of fashion or understanding. Not even close. I literally wore whatever it was. Jeans, I would wear 2 shirts sometimes. Never understood that. But there was something, and I think much of that came from observing other people.
Did your mom and dad care about fashion? My mom, if she didn't like what I wore, I got in trouble. I was sitting back to the room and I had to change.
Really?
It was kind of fascistic. Fascism.
My dad, I don't think he did, and I don't think he still does. I think with my mom, she understands it, but the thing that she chooses to do is she understands it as far as she's probably not the individual you're going to see spending thousands and thousands of dollars on clothes. I think she is very much aware of how much clothes cost, and that just because something is more expensive, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better or higher quality than some of the other things. So I think my mom is probably a little bit more aware than my dad of a sense of fashion, or even the color wheel. I'll give you a perfect example, actually. I still don't understand the color palette or the wheel. Like I truly, I can understand which are complementary colors and stuff, but if you were to put the things in front of me, I would have no idea how the matching process would work.
Interesting. Yeah, I learned about that from my husband and my old business partner. But you would probably see if we did our next episode of Just a Nut, as Jessica suggested, where it was a trip through memory lane of us looking all sorts of ways, which will not happen. No. But Jessica, we can always have a special episode with you. So please send us many pictures, and we'll make sure we post them all over everyone's social media. In fact, we'll hack yours, and we'll get Kenny to help us too. We'll do all of these things. I think that you would find that there was definitely times where, I looked like I didn't care. I will ask you all this, though, maybe to begin to close out. Would you be with someone, or Jessica, are you with someone? And I'll state this affirmatively about myself. I am with someone who will stop me if I am someone who people would respond to in an unacceptably negative way. Should we be out on the street and those observers are people watching? So, as an example, if I've got too much hair coming out of my ear, I will be blocked before I walk out the door by my husband, because he doesn't want people watching me that way. And I appreciate that. I will admit I like attention and all that, but that is the sort of attention that I would not like. Or if I were to walk out of the door and there would be like a big, as Lachelle Adkins once said on the show, there was a big bat hanging from the cave. Yeah. Would you all, what would happen? Do you all have, Jessica, does your husband sort of serve that function with you? And Kenny and Oleg, what about you? Would you be with someone who would protect you, or is that something that you view as a valuable function that someone would have?
Yeah, I think having a shared sense of responsibility when it comes to it, it's probably good, but at the same time, I think the question that becomes is, to what degree do you choose to point out certain things that are an inconvenience to you that may not be an inconvenience to someone else?
Jessica just gave an answer, pretty definitive one.
For example, if you like a certain shirt and I dislike it, and I'm going to tell you that don't wear that shirt because you will be treated in X, Y, and Z way. That's just my inconvenience. That's just my assumption of what might happen. And yet it might be your favorite shirt. So where do you draw the line?
Well, I will say, David and I were on vacation one time, and there was a shirt he had that he loved, and I just couldn't stand it. And we were in a department store, and he said, "Oh, what do you think of this shirt?" And I said, "That reminds me of that other shirt."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, that." And I don't think he realized I didn't like it. And I said, I kind of don't like that shirt at all. I wish you wouldn't wear it. And I'll never forget, he had this potential shirt in his hand, and he was like, stomped off. And I don't think we talked the rest of that afternoon.
But I do think there's an interesting form of shared responsibility that does come. But then at the same time, how do you still continue to encourage the other person to fully exercise their self-expression and not limit, and also create enough space for them to stay curious and to try out different things without always imposing your views and perspectives as the ones to live by? And if you don't, then in your case, the marriage would be over, or in someone else's, it might be the end of a friendship. So that's where I think for me, it's an interesting question to explore, is to what degree am I limiting the other individual from exploring their own sense of identity and curiosity, and to what degree are some of these things could actually be true and harm them in public due to other people's judgments and observations and whatever else that comes their way.
Oleg, you just expounded a bit on self-expression.
Yeah.
And people being able to have their voice out there. That's something you really believe in, isn't it?
I do. I people watch quite a bit on a couple of different shows. One of them is called Overcoming Odds. And what I find fascinating about that particular space is the space that I'm able to create, not only with the guest, but everyone else that chooses to watch us. And that is coming into the show and sharing their own perspectives about overcoming certain challenges within their lives, certain hardships that they've been able to reframe. And then outside of that, there's another show that I host called The Power of Your Story, which is very similar style. It focuses a lot more on the inner narrative and how that shapes the outer narrative, so to speak. So both of those for me are huge because what they allow me to do is they allow me to create a space with other individuals through which we're able to demonstrate our strengths and uniqueness to the world and really express what it is that it's on our mind and our heart. And I find that a fascinating show to be of. And I know that you have similar shows of your own. I know that you do a lot of work in this space. And I know for a fact that actually, when I even asked you the question, when it comes to our involvement with overcoming odds, as far as what impact it has had on you, one of the things that you said was self-expression.
Absolutely. It's a big deal. Before we go into that any further, and I want to thank you so much. These shows are phenomenal that you do. Mine is called Purpose Highway at purposehighway.com, which explores stories of entrepreneurs, leaders, influencers who have connected to a higher purpose to build a better self and a better world. I also am the new host of the Greater New York Area's District of Toastmasters Transformational Highways podcast. And the reason I mentioned that one tonight is because that one focuses on the power of communication. Purpose Highway is, of course, very, very special to me. There's another very, very special podcast that I do want to give a shout out to because of the person's consistent involvement in this show and their support, which is Jessica Dugas's Breakthrough Show.
Yes.
It's fantastic. Jessica, I believe, what are you on your third or your fourth season? In any event, anyone watching this, and I know we have people that watch this show or listen to it hours, days, even weeks after the fact. Be sure to check that out as well. Overcomingodds.today, the Power of Your Story podcast, which is Oleg's Purpose Highway and Jessica Dugas's Breakthrough Show. Oleg, we're about to close out. Is there any last word that you want to throw out there for us?
Well, briefly, I just wanted to mention, having been on Jessica's podcast however long ago by now, there's something that really stood out to me, and it's the space that she's able to create where I can unapologetically be myself and really share the different things that I have been through in life and be welcomed and accepted without a sense of judgment, but with true acceptance. That to me has been fascinating to observe. Talk about people watching as a huge skill in hosting many of the people that we have through our show. So I think if anything, when I think about her show, I think about a show that I'm constantly looking up to and I'm learning from all of these different things that she chooses to put out in the world and really using them as examples. So I think if anything, she is one of the individuals that truly does lead by example when it comes to that space.
And I'll just have one more aside since we're on a Jessica Dugas love fest here, but it's deserved, which is the other thing I like about Jessica.
Watching.
is that Jessica's also really great at, and this is a technical thing, but it's a big deal. And I've learned a lot from watching it. She's great at actually marketing her show.
Yeah.
And she really does a good job of developing advanced interest in each of them and then following up with them. So in any event, Jessica,
which is a difficult thing to do for especially podcast hosts. I know that Adrian and I were having a conversation about this recently, who's also a guest on the show, and that's how do you market yourself authentically? I think it's a serious skill. I think there's a lot more than being able to just put out posts and says that register today or pay here, but genuinely put out good, high quality content that makes people think, that helps them think about their own life, their own circumstances and situations in a different lens. That to me is the best thing that I could ever ask for.
Right. Absolutely. And Jessica, if you cry, that's fine. That's part of what people watching is.